You don't need to check the account balance again, Miriam. I've got everything under control. Gareth's voice carried that familiar edge, the one that suggested my concerns were both irrational and unwelcome. He barely looked up from his phone as he dismissed me. I closed my laptop, swallowing the question that had prompted his response. Why was our joint savings account suddenly missing $12,000? After 15 years of marriage, I'd learned which battles were worth fighting. This one, at this moment, with our 11-year-old daughter Eliza in the next room, wasn't one of them. I'd just like to know where we stand, I said mildly, gathering my papers from the kitchen table. The property taxes are due next month. I said I've got it covered. He finally looked up, irritation clear in his expression. Don't you have something else to worry about, like that little hobby business of yours? My hobby business, a residential interior design firm. I'd built from nothing over the past 7 years, had paid for our last 2 family vacations, and Eliza's private school tuition. But in Gareth's narrative, his corporate executive position was our financial foundation, and my work was a cute diversion that kept me busy. Speaking of which, I should get back to it. I have a client consultation at 3. I kissed the top of his head, a gesture that had once been affectionate, but now felt like a performance neither of us believed. As I climbed the stairs to my home office, a familiar heaviness settled in my chest. When had we become these people, cordial strangers sharing a mortgage, a child, and increasingly little else? Gareth had always been ambitious and somewhat controlling, but in the early years, those traits had seemed like security to a woman who'd grown up with financial instability. Now they felt like a cage whose bars had appeared so gradually I'd barely noticed my confinement. In my office, instead of preparing for my client meeting, I found myself staring at our wedding photo on the bookshelf. 2 smiling 20-somethings on a beach in Maui. My white sundress billowing in the breeze, his arms wrapped confidently around my waist. We'd had so little then, a starter apartment, student loan debt, and used furniture, but there had been an ease between us, a partnership. When had that changed? Perhaps when Gareth made partner at his firm while I was still struggling with postpartum depression after Eliza's difficult birth. Or maybe during the years I'd set aside my design education to support his career, moving 3 times for his promotions. By the time I'd launched my business, the dynamic was set. His work was a career, mine was an indulgence he tolerated. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Valerie. Coffee tomorrow? Need to talk to you about something. I replied with a quick confirmation, grateful for the interruption to my spiraling thoughts. Whatever financial discrepancy I'd noticed would have a simple explanation. It always did. Gareth was meticulous about our money, if somewhat secretive about the details. The next morning, I met Valerie at our favorite cafe midway between our homes. At 42, my sister was 7 years my senior and had always played a quasi-maternal role in my life since our mother's early death. Today, she seemed unusually serious as we settled into a corner table with our drinks. "How are things with you and Gareth?" she asked without preamble. I stirred my latte, buying time. "Fine. Busy as always." "Why do you ask?" Valerie took a deep breath. "Because I saw him yesterday, at Riverpoint Mall, okay?" I wasn't sure why this warranted a special coffee meeting. He was with a woman, younger, blonde. They were coming out of Cartier and she was wearing a new bracelet. They looked ... intimate. The cafe noise faded to a distant hum as I processed her words. Cartier, $12,000. A blonde woman. Maybe it was a colleague, I suggested, even as a cold certainty settled in my stomach. A client. Valerie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. They were kissing, Miri. Not in a colleague way. Oh, the single syllable was all I could manage. I'm so sorry. I debated whether to tell you, but no, you were right to tell me. I straightened in my chair, practicality asserting itself through the shock. Thank you. For being honest. What are you going to do? I took a sip of my latte, which now tasted like nothing. I don't know yet. But I need to be smart about this. And I did need to be smart. Because despite my successful business, Gareth had structured our finances to keep me dependent limited access to our investments. A prenuptial agreement I'd signed at 23 without legal counsel, and constant reminders that his income paid for our lifestyle. If my marriage was ending, and the sick feeling in my core suggested it was, I couldn't afford to act impulsively. Just promise me one thing, Valerie said as we prepared to leave. Don't confront him until you've spoken to a lawyer. Gareth can be calculating when he feels cornered. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. I promise. And Val? I may need to cash in that rain check for babysitting Eliza sometime very soon. As I drove home, grief and rage competed for dominance. But beneath them was something else, a steely resolve I hadn't felt in years. Gareth might think he held all the cards in our marriage, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. I hadn't always been Miriam Lancaster, corporate wife and mother. Before him, I was Miriam Chun, the daughter of immigrants who'd taught me that preparation and patience were often more powerful than confrontation. And I was very, very prepared to be patient. That night, I moved through our evening routine on autopilot, helping Eliza with her science project, preparing dinner, and engaging in polite conversation with Gareth about his day. He mentioned a challenging client meeting downtown but said nothing about shopping malls or jewelry stores. Each omission felt like a fresh cut. After Eliza went to bed, I retreated to my office under the pretense of finalizing a design proposal. Instead, I began a methodical investigation. Our prenuptial agreement protected assets acquired before marriage and stipulated that, in the event of divorce, we would each retain our separate property and split common assets equally. The house we lived in, a colonial in an upscale suburb, had been purchased jointly 7 years ago. What Gareth didn't know was that I'd been quietly preparing for this moment for nearly 2 years, ever since finding a suspicious hotel charge on our credit card statement that he'd dismissed as a billing error. I hadn't confronted him then, but the incident had awakened a dormant self-preservation instinct. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a false bottom I'd installed. Inside was a slim USB drive containing copies of all our financial records, tax returns, property documents, and a log of suspicious expenses I'd been tracking. Next to it lay a business card for Diane Winters, a divorce attorney recommended by a client whose discretion I trusted implicitly. I called Diane's office first thing the next morning and secured an appointment for that afternoon. Then I texted Valerie to confirm she could pick up Eliza from school, citing a client emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie, this was an emergency, just not a professional one. Diane's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, the elegant exterior belying the cutting-edge legal practice within. She was a petite woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the focused intensity of someone who'd seen every possible variation of marital dissolution. "So," she said after I'd outlined my situation, "you suspect infidelity and financial impropriety. What's your goal here, Miriam?" "I want what's fair," I replied. "I've contributed to this marriage in ways that don't show up on a balance sheet. I've put my career on hold for years to support his. I've managed our home, raised our daughter, and built my business despite his dismissal of it." Diane nodded. "And you mentioned some separate assets?" This was where my preparation became relevant. When my grandmother had passed away 3 years ago, she'd left me a modest inheritance, $175,000. According to our prenup, inherited assets remained separate property. Gareth had pushed me to invest it in our portfolio, but something had held me back. "I used my inheritance to purchase a commercial property," I explained. "A small office building on Maple Street. I did it through an LLC that Gareth doesn't know about." Diane raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. Why the secrecy?" "Because every time I've tried to make independent financial decisions, Gareth has undermined me. He convinced me to sell stock my father left me to pay for renovations on our first house, which he then sold when he got a job offer in another city. That house tripled in value 2 years later." I handed her documentation of the LLC and property purchase. "The building generates rental income that I've been depositing into a separate account. Again, legally mine according to the prenup, since it derives from inherited assets." Diane reviewed the documents, nodding appreciatively. "This is well structured. And according to your prenuptial agreement, both the property and its income should remain yours." "What about joint assets?" "That's where it gets complicated. I believe Gareth has been hiding money. Large withdrawals from our savings, investments liquidated without explanation. I've documented everything I could find." I passed her the USB drive, which she plugged into her computer. As she scrolled through my meticulously organized files, a small smile formed on her lips. "Mrs. Lancaster, you've done more preparation than 90% of my clients. This will be tremendously helpful." She looked up at me. "How do you want to proceed? Confront him, try mediation, or file directly?" I took a deep breath. "I want to be strategic. Gareth isn't just controlling, he's vindictive when challenged. If he realizes I'm planning to leave, he might try to damage my business or hide more assets." "Then we move carefully," Diane agreed. "I suggest we do a complete financial discovery before filing. We'll need to establish a comprehensive picture of all assets and liabilities. In the meantime, continue documenting everything. And if possible, secure copies of any additional financial records you can access legally. As our meeting concluded, Diane gave me a direct look. Miriam, I need to ask, are you physically safe in your home? Some spouses escalate when they feel their control slipping. The question startled me. Gareth had never been physically abusive, though his emotional manipulation had certainly left its own kind of bruises. He's never been violent, I assured her. His weapon of choice is financial control and making me doubt myself. Well, those days are over, Diane said firmly. Based on what you've shown me, you're in a stronger position than you realize. Just stay the course, keep documenting, and try not to tip your hand. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of agency. For too long, I'd surrendered my power in small increments, convinced that peacekeeping was more important than self-respect. That ended now. I picked up Eliza from Valerie's house, thanking my sister with a meaningful look that told her I'd taken her advice. At home, I prepared dinner and greeted Gareth with the same performance of normalcy I'd maintained for years. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer waiting for his approval or fearing his dismissal. I was planning my escape, and for the first time in our marriage, I held cards he didn't know existed. Over 6 weeks, I became a covert operative in my own marriage. By day, I maintained appearances, running my business, managing our home, preserving normalcy. By night, I meticulously documented Gareth's financial deceptions, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The hardest part was shielding Eliza. At 11, she was perceptive enough to sense the household tension, but too young to handle the truth of her father's betrayal. "Mom, are you and Dad fighting?" she asked one evening during her piano practice. "You guys barely talk anymore. We're just both really busy with work right now," I said, smoothing her dark hair. "It's grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." She gave me a skeptical look but returned to her music sheets. Eliza had always been observant, a trait that made me proud even as it complicated my current situation. My investigation had uncovered more than expected. Beyond the affair, which continued, evidenced by unexplained absences and mysterious withdrawals, Gareth had been systematically moving money into accounts I couldn't access. Diane's financial investigator discovered an offshore account containing nearly $300,000 funds that legally should have been considered marital property. "This strengthens our position considerably," Diane told me. "Hidden assets are viewed very unfavorably by family court judges. But we need to be prepared for him to fight aggressively once he realizes you've discovered his maneuvers." "I'm ready," I assured her. Each revelation had burned away another layer of emotional attachment, leaving behind clear-eyed resolve. The catalyst came sooner than expected. On a Wednesday evening, I returned home early to find Gareth in his office, engaged in a heated phone conversation. I paused in the hallway, out of sight. "I told you it's handled," he was saying tensely. "The transfer will clear by Friday, and then we can move forward with the condo purchase." Yes, of course she doesn't know. Miriam doesn't pay attention to these things. "No, the prenup is solid. When I file, she'll get basic support for Eliza, but that's it." The air vanished from my lungs. He was planning to file for divorce and purchase property with the woman he was seeing. My weeks of preparation had been prescient, but hearing him discuss our dissolution so coldly still felt like a physical blow. That night, after Eliza was asleep, I called Diane. "I need to file immediately," I explained. "He's planning to make the first move. I'll prepare the paperwork tonight," she promised. "We can file first thing tomorrow." The next morning, after Gareth left for work and Eliza for school, I met Diane at the courthouse. By noon, Gareth had been served papers at his office. His call came 3 minutes later. "What the hell is this?" His voice tight with controlled fury. "Divorce papers," I replied calmly. "I believe they're self-explanatory. You've lost your mind." "On what grounds?" "Financial misconduct for starters. The offshore accounts, Gareth. The $12,000 at Cartier. The condo you're planning to buy." A long silence followed. "You've clearly been misinformed. But fine, if this is what you want, you should know the prenup is airtight. You'll be walking away with virtually nothing. We'll see what the judge has to say about hidden assets." He laughed coldly. "Good luck proving that. I've been very careful. You should reconsider this, Miriam. For Eliza's sake, if nothing else." The mention of our daughter as leverage ignited a quiet rage. "Don't you dare use her as leverage. This conversation is over. My attorney will handle all further communication." That evening, I gave Eliza an age-appropriate explanation. "Dad and I have decided we need to live apart," I told her gently. "We both love you very much, but our marriage isn't working anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. "Is it because of the fighting?" "What fighting, sweetheart?" "The one I heard last month. Dad was yelling at you about money, and you said he was being unfair. Children absorbed so much more than we realized." I hugged her close. "It's complicated, but yes, we have different ideas about important things. Living separately will be better for everyone." As predicted, Gareth contested everything: the grounds for divorce, financial disclosures, custody arrangements. His attorney filed motions to dismiss our claims of financial misconduct and demanded adherence to the prenuptial agreement's strict terms. 3 months into the process, we faced each other in court for the first time. As we waited outside the courtroom, Gareth approached with smug confidence. "You could have avoided all this," he said quietly. "We could have handled this civilly, but you had to make accusations and demands." I met his gaze steadily. "You were planning to blindside me. I heard you on the phone talking about filing once you'd secured the money." His expression flickered briefly before the mask returned. "It doesn't matter. When this is over, you'll leave here with nothing. The prenup is clear. Mr. and Mrs. Lancaster?" The bailiff appeared. "Judge Morrison is ready for you now." As we walked into the courtroom, Gareth leaned close and whispered, "Remember what I said?" "Nothing." I remained silent, but as we took our places, I felt surprisingly calm. Whatever happened next, I had already reclaimed my autonomy. And unknown to Gareth, I still held my most significant card in reserve, one the judge was about to reveal. The courtroom was austere, all polished wood and muted colors. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, reviewed the documents before her with methodical precision. "We're here to address several motions in Lancaster versus Lancaster," she began. "First, the motion regarding adherence to the prenuptial agreement." Gareth's attorney rose, confidence radiating from his expensive suit. "Your Honor, the prenuptial agreement is clear. Mrs. Lancaster is entitled only to what she brought into the marriage, plus limited support for their minor child. All other assets remain with my client. The agreement also stipulates that hidden assets invalidate certain provisions," Diane countered. "As our filings show, Mr. Lancaster concealed significant funds during the marriage." The judge nodded. "I've reviewed those allegations. Mr. Lancaster, your response?" Gareth's attorney launched into a technical defense, claiming insufficient evidence and disputing jurisdiction over foreign accounts. Throughout his argument, I noticed Gareth watching me with barely concealed triumph. He truly believed he'd outmaneuvered me. When both sides had presented their arguments, Judge Morrison looked directly at me. "Mrs. Lancaster, your attorney has submitted a late-filed document this morning. A deed to commercial property on Maple Street, owned by Chun Holdings LLC. Would you explain the relevance?" This was the moment, the card I'd held in reserve. I felt Gareth stiffen beside his attorney. "Yes, Your Honor. 3 years ago, I inherited money from my grandmother. According to our prenuptial agreement, inherited assets remain separate property. I used those funds to purchase the office building on Maple Street through an LLC I established." "And the value of this property?" the judge asked. "The original purchase was $175,000. Current market value is approximately $425,000, with monthly rental income of $8,400. A string-glade noise came from Gareth's direction. This was the first he'd heard of my investment, my secret financial independence that I'd cultivated while he believed I remained dependent on him. "The property and its income are unquestionably separate assets under the terms of the prenuptial agreement," Diane added. "Furthermore, Mrs. Lancaster has maintained meticulous records showing that all property improvements and management came from the rental income, maintaining the separate character of the asset." Judge Morrison studied the documents, then looked at Gareth's attorney. "Counselor, do you dispute that this property qualifies as separate property under the agreement's terms?" His attorney, caught off guard, fumbled through the prenup copy. "We would need time to investigate this LLC's formation and funding." "Your Honor, the documentation appears comprehensive," Judge Morrison observed. "Bank transfers from Mrs. Lancaster's inheritance account to the LLC, purchase records, rental agreements. Mrs. Lancaster clearly established independent financial means that Mr. Lancaster was unaware of." She looked up, her expression stern. "In light of this revelation, combined with the evidence of Mr. Lancaster's financial improprieties, I'm ruling that the prenuptial agreement's punitive provisions are unenforceable. Further, given Mr. Lancaster's apparent attempt to hide marital assets, I'm ordering a full forensic accounting before any final property division. I didn't dare look at Gareth, but I could feel his shock radiating beside me. In 10 minutes, his certainty had crumbled. His whispered promise, "You'll leave with nothing," had been transformed by a deed he'd never known existed. As we stood to leave, Judge Morrison's final words echoed through the courtroom. "This court values honesty and transparency. Mr. Lancaster, perhaps you should have practiced more of both."